They lived beneath the restless skies of the north, where the wind carried the scent of salt and frost, and the sea stretched so far it seemed to swallow the edge of the world. In that cold, untamed land, a people rose, sailors, farmers, warriors, bound not by walls or kingdoms, but by the pull of the horizon. They built ships that could dance across waves like blades of iron and wood, vessels that would carry them beyond the ends of the maps their ancestors knew. And in their wake, they left behind stories that echo through time, of conquest, courage, and something far more complex. We know them as the Vikings, but behind that word lies a question that has haunted scholars for centuries. Who were they really? For a long time, we imagined them as a single tribe of the north, a pure bloodline of tall, blond-haired warriors, a people united by race, language, and destiny. It was a story that fit neatly into legend, a clean, powerful image that found its way into art, textbooks, even national pride. But as centuries passed, whispers began to rise from beneath the soil, from graves, from weapons, from the bones themselves. And those whispers told a different story. The truth, it turns out, wasn't simple at all. The Viking world was not made of one people, but many. It was a network of tribes, travelers, and cultures woven together by trade, migration, and survival. Their longships carried more than warriors. They carried ideas, languages, and lives from across continents. From the fjords of Norway to the shores of Scotland, from the frozen fields of Iceland to the rivers of Russia, they moved like tides, picking up pieces of every land they touched. For centuries, archaeology tried to decode their world. Burial mounds filled with swords and silver told tales of power and belief. Rune stones carved with names and prayers spoke of faith and honor. But none of it could tell us who these people truly were, where they came from, what blood ran in their veins. The bones were silent, until the 21st century. When ancient DNA began to speak, everything changed. In 2020, researchers at the University of Copenhagen led a massive study, over 400 Viking-age skeletons, unearthed from burial sites across Scandinavia, Britain, Iceland, and beyond. And what they discovered shattered centuries of myth. The Vikings were not a single race of northern warriors. Their DNA showed mixtures from across Europe and Asia. Some carried British ancestry buried in Norway. Others in England had roots stretching back to Sweden and Denmark. A few even traced their lineage deep into southern Europe and the steppes of Central Asia. This wasn't a people of isolation. It was a people of connection. Viking identity wasn't written in blood. It was written in how they lived. It was a shared language, a set of symbols, a way of life that anyone could step into. Vikingness could be adopted. It could be earned. It could be lived. Even the graves began to tell this new story. In Orkney, men buried with Viking swords turned out to be locals, born and raised on Scottish soil, yet buried as Norse warriors. In Birka, Sweden, one of the richest warrior graves once thought to belong to a powerful man was revealed by DNA to be a woman, a leader in her own right, armed and honored like any male warrior. In Iceland, settlers carried bloodlines from both Scandinavia and the Celtic lands. In Greenland, Norse colonists bore the marks of distant migrations long before they ever set foot on Arctic ground. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same truth. The Vikings were never one thing. They were a mosaic of peoples, languages, and lives, all held together by a shared vision of exploration and freedom. Their strength came not from purity, but from diversity. And yet, for generations, the old image persisted. The fierce, blond-haired Viking became an icon of racial pride and northern nationalism, a myth too powerful to die easily. But the bones, the DNA, and the soil disagreed. The truth was louder, older, and infinitely more human. They were explorers and traders, poets and parents. They built communities from the fragments of different worlds and carried them across the seas. And if you could stand in one of their halls, where firelight flickered across carved wood and iron, you'd hear not one tongue, but many. Voices from across continents, all sharing stories under the same northern sky. because the real power of the Vikings wasn't what set them apart. It was what bound them together. They lived at the edges of the known world, but their influence reached far beyond it. When their ships slipped through fog and ice, they weren't just chasing plunder, they were chasing opportunity. Every coastline they touched became a meeting point of worlds. In the markets of Hedeby and Burka, you could find beads from the Middle East, coins from Byzantium, furs from the Arctic, and slaves captured from across Europe. To the Vikings, the world wasn't divided into us and them. It was a map waiting to be explored, traded with, and, yes, conquered. Scandinavia in the early centuries wasn't a frozen fortress, it was a crossroads. The Baltic Sea served as a busy highway connecting tribes and kingdoms. Rivers like the Volga and Dnieper led deep into the heart of Russia, reaching the gates of Constantinople. Along these routes, the Vikings carried not only steel and silver, but culture, faith, and family. They didn't just raid, they settled, married, and mixed. Every exchange, every journey, every raid added new threads to the growing tapestry of Viking identity. It's here that the old myths crumble. Because when scientists began mapping Viking DNA, they found what the artifacts had been hinting at all along. The Viking age wasn't born from isolation, it was born from contact. A man buried in Denmark might have had Baltic or Slavic ancestry. A woman laid to rest in Norway could trace her roots to Ireland. Viking settlements in Iceland revealed the mingling of Norse and Celtic genes, while in Greenland, Norse colonists carried with them the echoes of Europe's diverse past. Their world was not a wall, it was a web. Even the way they saw themselves reflected this blend. Viking identity wasn't inherited, it was chosen. It was a lifestyle, a belief, a shared story. A Scot who sailed with Norsemen could die as a Viking. A woman who commanded respect in battle could be buried with a warrior's honor. To be a Viking was to belong to a culture that valued strength, courage, exploration, and reputation above bloodlines. It was not who your parents were that mattered. It was what you dared to become. But for centuries, this truth was buried beneath layers of nationalism and myth. In the 19th century, when Europe was defining nations by race and ancestry, the Viking became a convenient symbol, a proud, pure northern archetype. Blond, blue-eyed, invincible. A myth polished and weaponized to serve identity politics and imperial pride. Yet, when ancient DNA finally spoke, it told a story that was the exact opposite. The real Vikings were never pure. They were proof that strength thrives in mixture, not in isolation, and maybe that's what makes their story so timeless. Because it's not just about longships and raids, it's about connection. The Vikings remind us that human history has always been messy, shared, and intertwined. The borders we draw are fragile, but the ties we form are lasting. Their ships didn't only carry warriors, they carried languages, gods, and ideas across seas that once divided people. They didn't build empires, they built bridges. Picture it, a Viking ship gliding across gray waters, sails swelling like ghosts. The crew, men and women from distant lands, speaking different tongues, united by purpose. Ahead lies a foreign shore, behind them the fading coast of home. In their hearts, not the purity of blood, but the promise of possibility. That was the Viking world, a living network of humanity stretching across the horizon. And centuries later, when we look back, the lesson they leave behind is both ancient and urgent. Power doesn't come from being separate. It comes from being connected. The Vikings weren't defined by where they came from, but by how far they were willing to go. Their legacy isn't a myth of race or conquest. It's a story of resilience, openness, and transformation. So maybe the question isn't just who were the Vikings. Maybe it's what can they teach us now? Because in a world still struggling with identity and belonging, their story reminds us that unity doesn't require sameness, and greatness never comes from isolation. If you found this journey through Viking history as fascinating as I did, drop a comment below and tell me what surprised you the most about their true origins. And if you want to keep exploring the hidden stories of our prehistoric and medieval past, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. There's so much more history waiting to be uncovered, right here on Prehistoric Medievals.